Welcome to the Earthworks podcast, where our team will share the jargon of carbon from many of our turf friends from the past 30 years.
Hi, everybody. I'm Joel Simmons, and this is the Earthworks podcast. And I'm very excited to have Sam Ferro on with us today from Turf Soil Diagnostics. And this is the place where we go when we want to really understand the physical side of the soil. We talk a lot about on the podcast chemistry, physics, and biology. And physics is a very important leg of that three-legged stool. And Sam is the guy that we tend to lean on when we really want to dive into it. So great pleasure to have you on, Sam. I can't thank you enough. Like I said to you as we were getting started, I'm going to need a lot of support here because this is over my pay grade. You guys do a lot of incredible stuff. And like I said to you, we send an awful lot of our clients, especially guys going through construction, but even top dressing mixes and things like that. We send a lot of them to you to really dive into the testing. Now, we do some physical testing in Logan Labs, but it's really not much more than sand, silt, and clay. So we're pretty much that's our strength. So that's all I know is sand, silt, and clay. So first of all, let me say thank you for coming on and give me some idea. Tell us a little bit about Turf and Soil Diagnostics. And I guess there's two of you, right? There's two labs.
We have two labs. Yeah, thanks, Joel. I appreciate you having me on. It's physical testing is something that doesn't immediately come to people's mind, I don't think, when they think of soils. So I always tell people we're kind of a real niche part of the business, but real important niche. We do have two facilities. We have Turf and Soil Diagnostics. Both of our labs do the same testing. They're very complementary. In fact, it's really helped us to get a lot of the tests better, having two different facilities where we can correlate testing and zero in on getting methodologies right. But we have one in Kansas, in the Kansas City area, and we have one in New York, which is more of a central New York area. If you're familiar at all with New York, by the Finger Lakes.
Yep, up near Cornell, correct?
Correct. Yeah. We're very close to Cornell.
Yeah.
We're right by Ithaca. We're in a little town called Trumansburg, which is just outside of Ithaca.
And that's where this lab has really started out, right?
Actually, no. The lab started separately.
I didn't know that.
Turf Diagnostics and Design started in the Kansas City area in 1991.
Wow.
That's the predecessor to Turf and Soil Diagnostics. The other predecessor was called Hummel and Company, and that's the lab in Trumansburg out in central New York.
Oh, so there were two separate labs before Norm's departure of this whole process.
Correct. So Hummel and Company started in 1995. So both of our labs have, almost the same time frame history.
Gotcha.
It was right around the time that USGA really started having more intensive testing for putting greens.
Yeah.
There became just a bigger demand for that type of service, and now, as our services have expanded to, we do a lot of sports fields, we do a lot of big public landscapes, and a lot of green roof testing.
Oh, really? That's kind of interesting.
But yeah, we became Turf and Soil Diagnostics in 2015. So Dwayne and I, my partner up in New York, were approached by Norm Hummel. Prior to that, saying, hey, I want to retire, and I'd really like for you guys, if you're interested, to take over my laboratory. I think that's a sign of that we had some mutual respect for each other, even though we were competitors. And so, obviously we worked something out and joined the two labs together under one organization. Like I said, in 2015. So we're working on now our 8th year as Turf and Soil Diagnostics with those two predecessor companies.
And let me qualify. I mean, for those who don't know, Norm Hummel was a professor at Cornell for many, many years. And correct me if I'm wrong, Sam, but didn't he have a lot to do with the development of the USGA spec?
Well, sort of. The USGA spec actually dates back to the 1960s when the USGA first had their specification for putting greens. back prior to that, there were even some guidelines that tended to be a lot of soil sand mixes. You can go all the way back to old Tom Morris. He had written up how to make
Really?
a good putting green mix. Yeah, yeah, it's really kind of interesting. But Norm in the 1991, early 90s, we'll go
Early
with,
90s, yeah.
was when the USGA made a big renovation to their specifications. They had done a lot of research prior to that. And so actually, I'm going to say now 1994 was the year. But anyways, Norm was hired as a consultant by the USGA to put together the new recommendations, which are really the baseline for even the current recommendations that are used. So 1994, Norm authored. He had many people help him, but he was the primary author of the USGA recommendations for putting greens. So yeah, Norm has a pretty strong history.
Yeah, he does.
Development of not only testing of putting greens, but actually the development and evaluation of sand-based soils.
Yeah.
So Norm's got a great history, and we like to think we're carrying that on pretty well here.
You clearly are, and I always thought he was the. I just thought he developed it all, but what do I know? So where do we start? I mean, you and I talked earlier. There's a lot of testing protocols that you do, and part of what I'm trying to accomplish here is just help people better understand what the value of the physical testing laboratory is. So let's do a 30,000-foot overview as to, if I'm a golf course superintendent or a sports field manager, why do I want to use Turf and Soil Diagnostics? What's the value of the physical test as an overview?
Yeah. There's a couple of main areas that we'll go with. Just as an auxiliary that doesn't, we're not going to go over, is we do a lot of development work with suppliers when they're bringing in new materials.
Right.
We help suppliers to evaluate their materials to see if they're
for the supplier themselves.
Or the supplier themselves.
Got you. So a sand company or a sand pit would send you samples to make sure.
Or an amendment.
Hey, can I sell this?
Yeah, or someone that's has a new organic product, or new inorganic product for that matter. Something that does this hold water? Does this drain really well? If we add, can we make soil drain better?
That makes sense.
We work with. So that's kind of an aside, but that's one of the big areas we work with. For the golf course superintendent, for the sports field manager, we hit up a few different areas. Kind of the routine testing. We don't do the Logan lab testing. We don't do the NPK. We don't do chemical testing. We don't do biological testing. We are strictly physical testing. So where does that fit in? When you're looking for a top dress sand, is my top dress sand that I can get down the street? I can get it really cheap. Is this going to be good for me?
Will it screw up my greens? Is what you're saying?
Correct. So,
yes, it'll screw up your greens. Don't use that crap.
So we'll do some baseline testing on the existing putting green, and then on the top dress material, is it compatible? We do a fair amount of diagnostic work that some golf courses use on a yearly basis. Some do it every 2 years, some not as frequently.
Yeah.
But the diagnostic work tends to be what's called a soil profile evaluation. The way our lab approaches the soil profile evaluation is we provide sampling instruction to the turf manager. And that's we've got a USGA video we send them on how to take samples. We've got our instructions, and then we have our verbal communication.
Yeah.
Dwayne and I both like to spend a fair amount of time talking to to whoever's going to be doing the sampling, because, man, I tell you what, sampling is so critical. If you don't take the right sample, and you know this, Joel, but if you don't take the right sample, I can do a great test.
Right. It means nothing.
That doesn't mean a lot if it's not the right sample. So we'll provide the sampling details. But is what, in a nutshell, is what's done is 2-inch PVC pipe is beveled on one end, and you drive it through your soil profile. So for, say, a native soil sports field or a push-up green, you're not going to be able to drive a PVC pipe very far. You're going to go
I
at
think so.
8 inches, maybe 10 inches. You pull that pipe back up, you process it properly, meaning, a real key when you're taking a soil profile sample is making sure that the shippers don't screw up your sample
Oh, really?
once it's on the way to the lab, because we want that sample to be intact. We want it to
Now,
be.
you're talking about a core sample now in a PVC pipe.
In the PVC pipe.
How does the shipper screw that up? It's pretty compressed into that pipe.
No, it's not.
Okay, that's why.
It's only compressed if you put a whole lot of packing material into each side, both the top and the bottom. Anywhere there's empty space, we always tell people use bubble wrap, or I used to tell people newspaper, but
that wouldn't work, would it?
Not much newspaper in 2020.
Yeah, that's I can say there isn't much anymore. And wouldn't it get wet and draw moisture out of the sample and then just kind of crumble?
No, not typically.
Oh, good.
Is what again? Bubble wrap, shop rags, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
You put
anything just to hold the tube.
Hold it in. You duct tape off the ends, and you put bubble wrap around your tubes that you send into the lab.
So talk about that. So you get the sample, and now it comes to your lab. What you tear the PVC open and then just evaluate the structure?
Yeah, sort of. That's part of it. That is definitely part of it. So the soil profile test. So first off, the soil profile test, what are we looking for?
Yeah.
We're having people take a profile so we can look, we call it a window into the soil below the turf. We're looking at, are there layers there? Is it all just a fine graded sand, coarse graded sand, whatever it may be? What are the properties of the soil? Does it have a lot of organic? Is there a lot of buildup at the surface? Is there a problem on a sand over gravel type construction at the sand gravel interface?
Yeah.
So we're looking for where it's working good, the root zone below or the soil below, and where there might be problems. So it's what we actually ask you to do is to take 3 tubes from one location. These aren't 3 separate samples. Each tube's going to actually have different tests performed on it.
For example, from one green, you would take 3 PVC pipes, maybe 12 inches deep.
That's from native soil. From a sand-based root zone, we ask you to go all the way through the gravel layer.
The gravel, yeah.
Into subgrade. So in an older putting green, that could be 20, 24 inches deep, depending upon how much buildup has arisen over time.
Yeah. And you can probably get through 24 inches of sand, but
you can, yes, most definitely. And when you hit the subgrade below, because most of the time we hit subgrade below, and all of a sudden it stops.
Yeah.
There's an impediment to further driving that.
Are they able to get the subgrade in that tube? Can you see the subgrade?
Most of the time, yes.
So you could see whatever the choker layer would be, or whatever the gravel blanket
would be. See what the gravel layer is, the gravel blanket, and the soil below also helps to hold it in. We were talking about keeping it intact.
Yeah.
As opposed to having just sand or gravel.
Yeah.
We have sand and gravel and some finer graded soil that might be a little firmer. So anyways, one of those tubes, you're correct. We cut one of the tubes open lengthwise and we make our observations. We look at what layers are there. So in a typical sports field, typical putting green, there is a buildup at the surface that's going to be organic matter from turf growth.
Yeah, root systems,
roots, correct. Die down, thatch buildup, and there'll be top dress sand. So typically there's a distinct top layer that, depending upon how the maintenance has been done, can be anywhere from a half inch, if there hasn't been much top dressing and there hasn't been a whole lot of maintenance done, to several inches deep for a mature putting green. We'll test putting greens, 20 years old, and that haven't had any kind of renovation, that have just been maintained, and they'll have 6 inches of buildup over the top from years of, again, the turf growth, thatch buildup, and top dress buildup.
Yeah.
So
I have a small bone to pick on that one. I think you and I talked about that the other day when we met at the STMA. But can you qualify whether or not that organic profile, any organic profile, let me ask you this first. Any organic profile is going to slow down water. And is that primarily what we're looking at is what it does to penetration of water?
And water retention.
And retention. Okay.
There is a difference, but
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Good point. I'm glad you said that, because that's obviously as important, if not more so. Can you qualify whether or not this is good organic matter or bad organic matter? I mean, a good humus layer is going to allow water to move through fairly effectively. I mean, I guess the numbers kind of prove that, right?
We do get part of the testing is, how does that layer drain?
Right.
So, and how does it retain water? But we don't say this is good organic or bad organic.
No, I understand that, and you and I talked about that. You stick to that. That's it's the right thing to do. But I look at these things, and and one of the questions that I battle constantly in what I'm doing is, is this good organic matter or is it bad organic matter? And clearly, if you come back to me as the superintendent and say, man, that top 3-4 inches isn't moving anything, there's no air, there's no water, obviously that's not good organic matter. And I would assume that that's probably both more lignous organic matter and probably sand particle distribution, right? I mean, it could be a little bit of anything.
Can be. One of the things we run into all the time, especially with putting greens, this isn't as much of an issue as sports fields, but to get in that very thin layer of turf, you need a really fine sand a lot of times.
Yeah.
So superintendents don't necessarily use a sand that we can talk about later top dress wise, that we would consider from a physical point of view to be compatible with the root zone below.
Right. Yeah, and I definitely want to get into that. But let's stay with the core. Now, you sent me this great picture, and nobody can see this because they're listening as opposed to watching, but you sent me a picture of a core, and I've seen a lot of core pictures, and most of them have been really horrible. This is really perfect. It's incredibly consistent, other than that couple inches of organic. I guess you got two good inches of organic matter, but you've got to see a million different samples. I mean, coming in from all sorts of. I was at a golf course a couple of weeks ago down in South Carolina that had a huge, I guess 6, 7, 8 inch sand cap top dress. A sand cap on the fairway, and then this muck that was below. And I'm thinking about what you're doing, and I'm looking at this picture. I have a profile picture of this, and I'm thinking, what would Sam do to this one? I mean, this has got to be a trick. I mean, you got to see a little bit of everything when you open up these tubes. I mean, are there some really horrible things?
Certainly, and there's some really cool things. We have a golf course, a real famous golf course that does U.S. Opens in the Northeast that sends us their profile cores every year. And it's basically a push-up green that through...
I think we had him on the podcast. If I'm thinking of the same person.
Through many, many, many years of top dress and modification now, has about an 8-inch profile.
Yeah.
There's these spikes of sand going through.
Yeah.
And it's the soil texture now in that top 8 inches is a sand.
Yeah.
Through years and years and years.
It's as deep as 8 inches.
Yeah. It's just,
that's funny you say that, because,
profile.
We talk, obviously we're doing the chemistry leg of the three-legged stool. You're doing the physical leg. But when we talk about, chemistry, we're talking about CEC, and, one would think that these old push-up greens would have high CECs, but they don't, and I never really even thought it might be as deep as 8 inches, but 8 inches of sand is going to drop the CEC down to basically nothing.
Sure.
So is it typically, I mean, is there a golf course out there at all that's not top dressing? I mean, I can't even imagine.
It does happen. And, when we tend to get those cores in when a new superintendent comes in, because if a guy's not top dressing, he's not sending me a soil file sample.
Yeah.
We get the story. I'm a new superintendent. These greens are crap. I don't think he's done any maintenance, and we'll get them in, and sure enough.
So what do they do? They send you the core?
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
I'm not,
that's
but quite often it's the profile course where we do that's where we do our most diagnostic work.
that's where most of the stuff is. You know, it makes perfect sense. If I'm a new golf course superintendent, the first thing I'm going to do, one of the first things I'm going to do is get the soil sampling done, both fertility, you know, the stuff that we're doing at Logan, but as importantly, what you're doing, because again, we're talking about limiting factors, and certainly physics is going to be one of the first limiting factors. If that soil isn't draining, and it's and air's not going through it, then there's no way you're going to be successful. So that I think that would be one of the most important things that a new superintendent at a new property could do, is run that course, send it off to you, and just talk about it. And it may not be a problem, but at least it's off the table. But man, if that's a problem, I can't imagine that it's not, it's a complete impediment to their success, and you could fix that for them.
Well, and quite often, much of what the golf courses in the U.S. anyways, we do international work.
Yeah.
We get a lot of samples from Asia and the Middle East. There aren't as many golf courses in the Middle East, but we in South America.
They're growing though.
Yeah, most definitely.
In the Middle East, anyway.
We're working on some projects right now.
Yeah.
But anyways, they're manufactured putting routes. They've been built, a lot of this has been built or renovated in the last 30, 40 years. So they tend to be sand-based root zones. And, for the good of our industry, a lot of them that were built to USGA recommendations or something very similar. Some good quality sand, organic, sand, there's some good inorganic amendments around also, but some type of amended sand profile over gravel. So it tends to be good construction. Our construction companies that work in our industry in the U.S., for the most part, have been doing this for quite a long time now. So we've got good construction companies. Anyways, that's leading to my point. My point being is most of the root zones that we deal with, not all, but most of them are built properly, using a good sand, using a proper amendment. And we often find that if, you take that top layer out, which a lot of guys are going to be regrassing, what do I have to do? Do I need to totally rebuild, or can I get away with something less? If you get that top layer out, that root zone below works the same as it did the day it was constructed.
Assuming it was done right at the time, it's probably still right.
And it's interesting because people tell me, well, didn't the organic's going to break down? It's like, dude, that organic is 1,000 years old. It's not going to break down any more in the next 20 years than it did in the previous 1,000 years.
Unless you use earthworks, then it'll break down a lot faster. But that's a cheap plug, so I won't go there. But yeah, I mean that makes perfect sense.
I'm talking about the root zone, the constructed material.
I'm kidding, obviously.
Yeah.
Let me ask you something about that root zone. I mean, a lot of folks are still debating whether or not to use peat moss. What's the general consensus on the value of peat moss? And it seems like we kind of left it completely. Now we're kind of dribbling back into it. And I'll qualify this by saying one of the things that I see a lot by looking at the kind of profiles that you do is migration of peat moss. And is it really helping it? And feel free not to answer this question if you don't want to. But what's the general consensus these days in your mind?
I'm going to disagree with you if that's okay.
That's fine. That's what this is about.
Okay. Now, we do a lot of testing of sand, peat, root zone mixes.
I would think so.
Yeah, I'd say we did less over the last 10 years just because there was less construction being done.
Yeah.
Certainly with the last few years, with our bounce back in golf, and we're doing a lot more sand-based sports fields right now too, which I think is somewhat related to people just getting outside more. There's more outdoor events happening. That's a good thing. But anyways, peat is a really good amendment. It holds water. If used in the proper ratios with the sand. The thing that we find is that there's a lot in the industry. Well, I need a 90-10 without somebody knowing even what a 90-10 is.
Right. That's what I was trying to get at. So where are we now with
the guy
peat?
down the street had a 90-10. Well,
I want to do that.
90-10 what? Well, he's got sand and peat. Well, what's sand? I don't know. Well, what peat? I don't know. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately for me, so I can keep working.
Right.
All sands are different. A coarser sand is going to have less water holding. You need more of whatever amendment you choose, whether that's a peat or some other organic amendment or some inorganic amendment like a calcined clay. You might
zeolite.
or zeolite. All zeolites are different.
Yes, they are.
On gradation and origin. The materials you're blending make the mix, not some magical number. Your sand and amendment X may be better at a different ratio than the guy down the street who used a different sand but still amendment X.
Right. So you would test the sand and then come back and calculate the ideal percentage of any peat moss.
No,
for
it's
example?
not a calculation, Joel. It's what we do is we have this is different than the diagnostic. We've kind of gotten off a little bit.
So, we're going to bounce around. That's all right.
Yeah, we've kind of gotten off that. But when we're looking for someone to come up with a mix for their green, for their sports field, for their landscape project, for their tennis courts, for whatever it may be, we have them send us the base materials that they want to use. So if they want to use a sand or they don't know which sand they want to use, we have them send us the local sands and we test them and say, well, this one looks the best for what you're looking for. And what I mean by looks the best, has the best gradation, has the best angularity, has the best spread of particle sizes. Then we'll make trial mixes with whatever amendment they want to use. So let's just say it's a peat and that it's a sand that meets a USGA guideline for gradation. We would typically take that sand and mix it with a low amount of peat, whatever ratio, depending upon the gradation. Again, coarser materials take more than finer materials because those fines in the soil, as you know, they hold water.
Yes,
they hold nutrients. So if you've got fines in your sand and your roots on the soil, you may not need amendment, or if you need amendment, you may not need as much amendment.
All based on the sand.
Regardless, based on the sand, correct?
Yeah. Let me ask you about that. And this is one of the things. Let
me go through this real quick, and then
go ahead. Sorry.
Go back. Then we'll make a mix with varying amounts of the amendment, and we'll test them for performance. How do they drain? How do they hold water? How much airspace is there for soil gas exchange?
Right.
So, depending upon the material, maybe the high amount of amendment was the best mix. Had the best properties, had good drainage, a balanced pore space. An ideal soil has an equal amount of air-filled pore space and an equal amount of water-filled pore space. We don't often get ideal soils, but we want something.
Yeah. No, I'm sure
we want something close.
But if we're close, we're good.
Right. So we're trying to come up with the ratio of whatever sand and amendment they're using that's going to give us the best balance of porosity and good drainage.
Yeah. So again, really the importance of doing this at time of construction. I mean, I never really even thought of it at that depth, Sam, but that's very helpful. Let me ask you this. Sand is different everywhere you go. I mean, that's got to be pretty frustrating. I mean, I know it's frustrating for superintendents. They might pull 3 or 4 companies' sand mixes and send them to you. Are you seeing? Can there be a radical swing in a region? Let's say if you're in Kansas City and I want to go to 2 or 3 sand suppliers. Is it common to find?
It depends on where you're at. A lot of our sands are river sands, so. Where you're mining at in the river, dredging at in the river is going to affect what your sand's like, and also what the river flow is affects the sand.
Changes the angularity too, right?
Not as much the angularity, but certainly the gradation. Higher flows will wash away the fines.
Okay, got you. That makes sense.
Drier and things settle out more. I'm certainly not an expert on dredging, so that's just kind of a real quick generic thing on flow and what you get sand wise. And then if you're mining a sand, you hit different parts of wherever you're mining, the sand can change. So not only from location to location, but within a specific sand plant, sands can change. Now, having said that, sand plants, a good sand plant will have what's called a classifier. So they
Oh, good.
can control that gradation within a certain amount. So they can take away some of that fluctuation of the river flow.
So if they move 20 yards down the vein, they're checking that gradation to see if it's consistent.
Right. That's almost universal for sand because they're going to do that. The issue we run up against is that for turf growth, we have much tighter specs than, say, a asphalt or a building sand, which is for most sand companies, doing there's a whole lot more roads built than there are putting greens built.
Yeah, that's a pretty big conversation these days, and a lot of guys are having a problem getting sand solely for the purpose that golf course sand is a pain in the butt for these guys when they can sell everything that they have to build a road.
Right. No, that's true, especially with the way right now the governments are spending on infrastructure projects.
Yeah. So and that's only going to get worse if infrastructure gets better. So are we in danger down the road of finding a good source of sand for construction in our industry?
I think it's already an issue in certain locations.
Yeah. I know the guys out in California, and we've sent a couple of guys to you recently in the Bay Area that, both of them have said to me, this has not been easy, just getting.
But there's some good sands in the Bay Area, so they should be able to find something. Places like Texas, though, where they use a lot of this sand for fracking.
Yeah.
Fracking, they take all the fines out because that's what they use when they're doing their fracking.
Oh, so they shoot the fines down into the hole,
down into the ground to get the oil out. Correct.
Why fines? Just because it's easier to shoot through.
Easier to flow. Yeah. Easier.
Oh, that's interesting. I want to keep moving down my little laundry list here. Let's talk about and this is one thing that I'm really kind of stupid about. One of many, of course. Water release curves. Talk to me about a water release curve. Tell me what the why would I use it? What does it show me? How do I read it? What is it really telling us?
All right, well, there's a water release curve is a huge window of things, but I realize
that. So put you on the spot. So now you're on.
I'm going to keep it to what we would typically do, say for a golf course plating effort or for a sports field construction effort.
Okay. So this is a tool that would be used during construction?
It's a tool that's used during construction pretty routinely, actually. What it helps us to do is to evaluate how the intended soil, once again, whether that's a mix that we've put together or whether that's just a product that was sent into us test, how it performs at varying depths is really what it tells us. So how a soil performs, what do I mean by that? Performance in my world from a physical point of view. I think I told you this earlier. I have a real narrow lane that I
like it though, because I got chemistry, I got a little biology, and I love leaning on you for the physics because I don't get it.
So I don't tend to dabble in those other areas. That would be dangerous.
Yes, I know. That's why I'm talking to you about physics.
Yeah. Anyways, so what is performance? It's what I was talking about earlier. It's getting that good drainage and getting it soil where it can retain nutrients, can retain water, but also have enough pore space, big pore space, air-filled pore space for soil gas exchange. That also the bigger pores, I guess I kind of skipped over. In general, when we look at pore space, we have what's called the capillary pore space, which are the smaller pore spaces in the soil, and the non-capillary or the aeration pore space, which is the bigger pore space. The bigger pore space is just that, it's aeration, but it also that's where we get our drainage for the most part.
And how are you testing that? How are you testing the difference?
It's some really neat processes. We actually take soils and adjust the moisture. How soils, because we're going to compact them. How a soil compacts is related to how wet it is. So we have some standard moisture contents that we do things at.
Mhm.
We have standard compaction levels we do things at. And this is to give us a standard comparison from sample to sample to sample. Because if we did sand X at 10% moisture and sand Y totally dry, we may not get a direct comparison, and Y may work the way it works because it was dry, and X may work the way it is because it's wet. So we do a common moisture content. We do a
Right.
common compaction procedure. So we take soils, we compact them. It's a long process. I'll try to go really quick and
No, take your time. We got hours. We need to know this stuff.
Okay, well, I got guys that are going to be wanting me to write them reports. So I don't know what I do.
All right.
But anyways, we compact the soil into standardized containers. There's containers that literally we measure every year to make sure they don't change size. We know their height, we know their volume.
Yeah.
So we know our test course. We know exactly how much soil we've put into a core. We put the soil in, it's compacted to the standard procedure, and then it goes on what's called a tension table. Well, it's saturated first off, and it goes on what's called a tension table. A tension table is where we're getting in that water release test.
Okay.
The tension table is basically, the easy way to think about it is it gives us an indication of a soil depth. So if we do a test at a 10 centimeter tension, that's equivalent to a 4-inch depth. 30 centimeter tension is the USGA tension, and that's the 12-inch depth. The USGA recommendations for a putting green construction are 12-inch root zone. Anyways, we'll compact the soil. We'll put it on this tension table. We'll get it to that soil tension. I said that backwards. We'll put it on the tension table, get the soil to the proper tension, and then we'll compact it. So soils are packed at a specific.
That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah.
And then we'll run the infiltration rate test. We're literally having water run through the soil, collecting the soil over a set amount of time to see how fast the water goes through the soil.
So you can get inches per hour.
Inches per hour, centimeters per hour. We can use whatever units the customer wants to use.
I'm looking at the chart that you sent me this morning. So you've got tension going horizontally across the bottom, porosity percentage going vertically, and then these two curves. I assume that point at which it meets, is that the sweet spot? Is that where we're looking for?
That's exactly right. So I'm going to get to that right now.
Okay.
So once we've done the infiltration rate test, we then resaturate the soil. We'll put it on a tension table. Our standard tension when we do a water release test are 15 centimeters, 6 inches, 30 centimeters, 12 inches, and then 45 centimeters. So 18 inches.
Those are standard calculations.
So that's our standard testing. We're doing this testing.
Okay, gotcha.
Different tension tables at different depths. So we got different suctions, amount of suctions to emulate different soil depths. So then is what you see in that chart is what was the aeration porosity. There's other parts of this test where we determine the total pore space. It's related to the bulk density and the particle density.
Right.
We'll just leave it at that. Of that total porosity, though, how much of it is filled with water and how much is filled with air? Almost universally, certainly if the soil doesn't if the soil stays saturated, you'd get a straight line all the way across. Well, with most of the soils that are desirable for a sports field or a golf course, we certainly don't want that. We want them to.
Yeah, that would be nice to drain.
Yeah. So we evaluate how much water it's holding and how much airspace is available at those varying depths. So that is the water release curve. So
Gotcha.
let's say that at that 6-inch depth, that 15 centimeter tension, it's, if you look at that particular chart, I don't know what it is. I don't have it sitting here in front of me, but it's probably super wet. So the capillary porosity is pretty high at 6 inches. The aeration porosity is quite low at that same depth because we have only so much pore space. We've got, we'll say 50%. Let's say it was an ideal soil. Well, at 50% of that, if 40% is filled with water, there's only 10% left for air.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot of room here.
Right.
Let me go back just one. Just explain to me or us. I'm going to ask the stupid question so that those that aren't sure will follow me. Explain tension. Porosity we kind of get, but how do you define tension?
Yeah, I guess I didn't do a very good job of saying that earlier. Tension is related to soil depth. So a
Is
15
that similar to compaction?
No, it's the
Okay.
depth of soil.
Okay, that's
So
where
we're
I was
analyzing
confused.
that
So
soil if it was constructed at a 15, if it's a 15
gotcha.
centimeter depth, we're analyzing that soil as if it was constructed with a 15 centimeter or 6 inches.
That's the tension.
depth. When we do the 30 centimeter test, that's 12 inches. We're analyzing a deeper profile. We're analyzing a 12-inch profile of that same soil to see how it performs on a 12-inch profile. In general, the shallower a profile is, the wetter it is. And we know that.
Makes sense. Yeah, it makes sense.
You could think about it as a bathtub. If you've got a 2-inch bathtub, you put in 100 gallons of water, it's going to overflow. It's totally full. Well, that same 100 gallons of water in a 12-inch bathtub may not overflow. It may
Not
be
impacted at all. Yeah.
So that's what we're looking at is, okay, at different soil depths, how does this soil perform? And so, as you said, when we get to that, what we'll call the sweet spot, where it's a balance of air and water fill porosity, that's the depth where the data suggests you would get optimum performance.
Okay, that makes sense. So that's essentially what I want to be, is in that sweet spot. Let me ask you, on this particular report, you've noted washed sand as opposed to not washed sand. Is there a huge difference between washed sand and not washed sand?
It was the name of that particular sample.
Okay, so it's not necessarily a process.
No, but a washed sand just means that it's been through a sand plant and they have a wash cycle.
Does that change the particle size analysis?
Yeah, wash cycles are used to eliminate fines.
Right.
So is what you'll see. I'm sure you've driven by an aggregate plant and you see those big, giant columns where they're pulling the material up. In a wash plant, once you get to the top of that pulley and the sand or the aggregate starts to go downward through a chute, they'll have water shooting up through it.
Yeah.
And there's certainly other wash plants, but the one I'm familiar with will then be washing out all the fines and or whatever fines they're trying to get rid of. Yeah. So it's to get rid of small particles. So wash sand tends to be what a lot of our top dress sands are.
I know this is going to be another stupid question, but explain to us how the water release curve changes from sand to a soil. Is it run the same way? Are you kind of evaluating it the same way? Obviously, it's different, but
the soil will use higher tensions, so we'll evaluate related to deeper depths.
So that lower axis changes,
right?
Okay, right. So you can still have the curve will still kind of provide the same
type of info. Is what a lot of people do with soils. Isn't really related to how deep to put it. It's just to give them an idea of maintenance of how it's going to hold water.
That makes sense.
As it dries out.
Yeah.
I don't have a direct correlation for this. It's going to dry in 2 days. If it's
sure you don't have a magic ball. What do you mean? I thought you had all the answers. That's why we work with you. All right, let's talk about particle size evaluation. Obviously, this is key to at least the USGA spec. I assume that I'm looking at one of your particle size evaluation forms. I assume most of this, and please correct me if I'm wrong. Let's just go through this, but most of this is part of the USGA spec. At least that top profile where it says percent sand, silt, and clay, gravel. Very coarse, medium. All those are the USGA specs. That's
USGA, and I think I might have glossed over this, but we also use the ASTM standard guide for sports fields for sand.
Explain that real quick so that people understand the difference.
They're actually very similar. I think in a lot of ways it was just written by different people. They're both guides to help you to pick a good sand for a sand-based field or a sand-based.
Is there a lot of difference between fields and greens in terms of what you do?
Actually, not a lot. The key difference comes into that particle size.
Yeah.
A sports field, you can use a lot coarser sand than you can for a putting green. A fairway, you can use a coarser sand than you can for a putting green, and that has to do with height of cut. You can't.
That makes perfect sense. Yeah.
You can't use a coarse sand if you're cutting at
at an eighth of an inch.
Yeah. It's just going to tear up your mowers. You're gonna throw all the sand everywhere. It's and that comes into the top dressing also.
Yeah, the mechanics would hate you if that happened, right? It would be screaming and yelling.
That is for darn sure. You would not. So with the sports field, we can use a coarser sand, and so with the sports field, we have kind of a wider window of what we can use than what we would typically have for a putting green.
Makes sense.
And again, like I said, for people that are plating their fairways, sand capping their fairways, you tend to use a coarser sand. So
and you're looking for more porosity in that case anyway. So I mean that would make perfect sense.
That's exactly right.
So that again, and anybody can go to your website and find this, and I'm sure certainly sports turf managers, golf course superintendents have seen the particle size evaluation from a lab like yours or yours, but these are pretty standard percent sand, silt, and clay.
They are. Yeah.
And obviously we're looking for a higher sand, and then going through the percentage, and you give some guidelines on this. Are these, do you have a lot of guys that ask you a lot of questions about this? I mean, what's the normal question when it comes to that top part of the page? I mean, what do they need to know? What do they ask you the most?
There's a couple real keys. One, we're looking for in general, what's referred to as a medium coarse sand.
Yeah.
So most of the particles are in the medium and coarse sand size fractions. I think the USGA recommendation, I know it's greater than 60%.
So, and you write this in here. You got, very coarse is 18. I'm assuming these are percentages. 35 for coarse, 60 for medium, 100 for fine, and then
those are the stiff sizes. The percentages would be down below.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm backwards. Yes, you're right.
But anyways, the real keys are kind of the two ends of the report. Meaning, when we send out a report, first off, we tell the sand, silt, and clay content,
right?
Which is kind of a standard soil textural evaluation. But then the gravel and very coarse sand, as well as the fine and very fine sand. So those two ends of, and I'll go real quick here, the fractions it's broken down, soil is broken down to, and our typical particle size are the gravel, very coarse sand, medium sand, fine sand, very fine sand, silt, and clay. So, having said that, you get too much fines, you basically shut down your drainage.
Clog everything up.
You hold too much water, you clog everything up. You get too much coarse, you don't hold any nutrients or water. So those are, kind of the key things you look at. But then when we're looking, say, for top dress, we want that whole gradation to be somewhat similar for the top dress sand than it is for the root zone below.
So when somebody sends a top dressing into you, do they also send a core of their green?
No, they don't have to do that. Quite often, guys, we've already got their data. So if we've got the data, we've got the data.
Well, that makes sense. But if you don't have the data.
Change, but having said that, we would need a sample of the root zone. It doesn't have to be a profile sample, though, but it can be a loose bag sample.
Gotcha.
So that we can run a comparison particle size test. And so why do we want it to be compatible? Well, if we go with the sand that's too fine compared to what's down below, all the water tends to be held, that in conjunction with the organic buildup that we're trying to somewhat alleviate by top dressing.
Yeah.
Is the buildup, but we're in a lot of ways contributing to the water holding because we're putting too fine of a sand.
Right. You're plugging it up even more. Yeah.
Yeah. And we didn't get into this when we talked about the diagnostic course, but one thing we see quite often is very shallow roots in a putting green. And there's other factors, but a big part of that factor is that's where the water's at. That's where the organic, you got the organic there, you got a finer top dress sand in the soil below. The roots want to be where the water's at. So
couldn't that also be the lack? I mean, that there's no oxygen for them to get into. I mean,
Of
if the
course.
soil's clogged up, there's no oxygen below that root zone. They're not going to go into a soil that doesn't allow it to breathe.
Right. No, that's a given.
And
That's
you're
true.
doing both. I mean, you're basically what you do is you balance air and, like you said, I mean, ideally 50-50.
What we're trying to help people achieve.
Yeah, exactly. And building that root zone. And that's why this physical is so bloody important, is that if you don't have air and water, you're not going to get roots to move. I talk about it at my academies, the classes I teach. I always, and I'm going to give this away now, and I probably shouldn't, but I always ask the question, what's the most important nutrient in turf? And the answer that I give them is oxygen. And I can't sell them oxygen. As much as I want to give them a 275-gallon tote of oxygen, nobody yet has bought one from me. So, but you can give them oxygen. So, and I even drop your name at times when I say it. I said, look, this is where physical testing can buy you oxygen, because you're creating pore space and managing pore space.
And that obviously becomes, ties into aerating, air. I know, everybody's, our golf course doesn't want us to aerate.
Right. Yeah. We don't want air in our soil. We don't need a place for the roots. Or in my case, more importantly than the roots, soil microbiology needs to have oxygen. And if there's no oxygen there, you don't have nutrient mobility, because they all start the whole thing. But, what's your take on that? Let me just, pick your brain on aerification. I mean, obviously, I'm going to say it's important because I want to get biology and air in for roots. But when you're doing physical testing and you balance this soil out, especially on sands, do we need to aerify a well-balanced, physically well-balanced sand green?
In a perfect world, I would think a golf course should aerate, 4 times a year.
Okay. Regardless of what your test says, if you're perfect on paper, physically, you would still recommend it because of the physical pressure.
You've got to open that pore space.
Yeah.
And ideally, depending upon the situation, most often it's a positive to then follow that up with putting some top dress sand in there, or an aeration sand. And I'll quickly go over what I mean by a difference between that. Top dress sand is the sand that we're using for our routine top dressing. An aeration sand can often be a coarser sand to help keep that bigger pore space in there and get more oxygen down into the root zone.
One of the first times I really got to work with you, or at least send stuff to your lab, was I was working with a client that had a putting green that was literally right outside of the clubhouse. I mean, everybody stared at it, and it had a big tree over it, which happened to be the logo tree, so they couldn't cut it down. First recommendation of anybody that came by is cut that bloody tree down, because it's killing you. But what we found out was that when we sent this to you, the top profile was pretty fine. So he changed his top dressing to bring in a coarser sand, and within a season or less, it really just made a huge difference in that green. And he was able to really get, keep the density of that grass. And beforehand, it was holding water, it was getting thin. He was, I mean, it's the first thing you see when you come to the club, and it's ugly, but it ended up being a physical issue that he was able to fix by just simply changing his top dressing out a little.
Aeration and top dressing are just critical.
Let me go through the bottom of this, because I'm running out of time here, Sam. I could do this for another 2 hours, but I know you've got reports to write and I've got some things to do. The bottom of this thing, so you've got a couple things that I'm not sure I even really fully understand, and I'm sure a lot of people don't. Uniformity coefficient, what's that?
Uniformity coefficient, it's a calculation that's done from the particle size. And it's what it tells us generically is what the spread of the particles are. If all the particles were the same size, we'd have a uniformity coefficient of 1. Okay? It's
Makes sense.
It's basically big particle size, a certain particle size. I'm not going to bore you with how we do the calculation, but it's big particle divided by small particle. So if they're all the same size, you got 1. If you got a wide spread of particles, that number gets larger. For a putting green, an ideal uniformity coefficient is about 2 to 3.5. So when you're looking at that particle size test and you see the uniformity coefficient 2 to 3.5, the higher the number tends to be, the firmer the soil.
Really?
So for an
you guys push that?
What's that?
Do guys push that to get firmness, playability?
The problem is finding a sand that you can
Lets you do it. Yeah.
modify your existing material with.
Yeah.
So with an athletic field, we'll want 2.5 to 4.5 as our desired uniformity. So a higher number. Remember I said 2 to 3.5.
Yeah.
Because we want it to be more widely graded. We want it to be firmer because in a football field, we got 350-pound men pushing on each other.
Right.
It's got to be able to stand up to some pressure. Now, certainly a golf ball slamming into a putting green's pressure, but
and 30,000 feet walking over the green every year.
Yeah. Yeah. So uniformity coefficient can give you an idea of stability. So if that uniformity coefficient is too low outside of the ranges that are recommended,
Gotcha.
you can have loose soil. If it's too high, it may be too firm. I mean, you may, make yourself some cement.
And you would just bring in fines to loosen it up, or courses.
When we say a high uniformity coefficient, it means it's a widely graded sand, meaning there's a lot of coarse stuff and a lot of fine stuff both. So it's the opposite of one size.
Gotcha. So how do you fix that if it's high?
Yeah, you may not be able to.
Great.
You may not be able to.
Yeah. The next three boxes are D15, D50, and D85 millimeters. What is that referring to?
Some of those numbers are used when we calculate what's called the bridging with the gravel.
Okay.
So some of it's used just to see what it's going to be compatible with the gravel. What I mean by bridging is the sand going to stay on top of the drainage gravel below, or is it going to fall?
Gotcha. That makes sense.
But what those numbers are, the D value is the point at which that percentage is smaller. So a D50 would mean 50% of the particles are smaller. A D85 means 85% of the particles are smaller. So it's really just kind of a quick scan of your particle size. Yeah. Almost more useful for a soil scientist than perhaps for the end user. Oh. But it does have functionality, like I said, for some other things. Primarily comes into that bridging and stability.
The bridging side, yeah. So the next box in here is one of the things that a lot of guys love talking about, and I'm not sure they fully understand it. You've got shape angularity, so you got angular to sub-rounded. Right. What's the skinny on all that?
All right, so that's first off, it's when we do that, it's an observation. So it's not, we don't have some machine that tells
under a microscope.
Right, under a microscope. Yeah, so we don't have a machine that tells us the shape. However, I was talking about a wider graded sand that high CU will be more stable. A low uniformity coefficient would be less. Well, spread of particle sizes isn't the only thing that affects stability. Particle shape affects stability. If we have a round sand, a lot of times it doesn't matter what our uniformity coefficient is. It's still going to be loose because it's round particles.
Because it's round. It's not. It's just,
it's the old bead example. So, but a lot of and I don't mean this to be a negative at all, but it's going to sound like it. But a lot of the times river sands are smoother, so they'll be more rounded.
Yeah, I'd asked you that earlier. I would assume, water rushing over, pebbles is going to round it off a lot. So I didn't realize when you said that river sand was so common in our industry.
Yeah.
I always thought it was quarry sand but what do I know?
And where a mine sand will tend to be more angular. So a mine sand may have that lower uniformity coefficient. It may be more one size, but that angularity helps the particles to pack in. It's stable. Yeah. That comes in a lot when we're looking at bunker sands. Is the bunker sand going to hold up a golf ball? That shape and the uniformity coefficient have a big play in how a bunker sand holds a golf ball.
And I assume you're testing bunker sands on a regular basis.
We do a lot of bunker sand testing.
Yeah. Yeah, that was I was getting. I asked you this earlier. I mean, I had a client ask me this morning about bunker sand, and it's coming in kiln dried, and it just becomes powder. Now, is that physical? I mean, when a bunker sand becomes really powdery and light and fluffy, is that angularity? What is that?
Well, if it's powdery, that's probably not a very good bunker sand.
No, I'm not. That's obviously why I got the call.
Yeah, but I wouldn't think that would be from the drying process. There must be some other process that, and I don't know. I'm speculating.
But it could be physical, though. Couldn't it be angularity, or I mean,
powder means it's a small particle.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's got to be. It's got to be
It's
size.
more of a size thing, I believe, than an
Yeah.
angularity.
But
Yeah.
sand should, I mean, you don't see sand really being, I don't know. That's for another
Well,
question.
again, if it's a loose sand, I mean, I'm fine graded sand, they'll blow in the wind.
Yeah.
Whereas, of
The
course,
sugar sands of the South that they refer to as,
correct,
it
correct.
just literally blows away.
When they're dry, they'll blow around. You see that at the beach once it's
So the
dry.
next things on this page, and I just want to get through this before we run out of time. And I'm gonna say this word wrong again, but shape, sphericity,
Right.
and
So
then
the
and then
angularity and sphericity.
sphericity. Yeah,
Yeah.
medium to high. It says here. Now
I
what?
kind of did that when I was talking about angularity. I was speaking of both.
Okay.
Angularity is whether something is pointed, I guess is a good way to say it, as it angles,
Yeah,
or
it's angled. That makes
whereas
sense.
sphericity is more of a rounding.
Yeah.
Um, if we have a sphericity is more if it's a long flat particle versus more of a compact particle.
Right.
So they tie in. It's really the shape is two different ways to really just describe the shape of the particle is what we're talking about.
What does acid reaction mean on this test?
Acid reaction gives us an indication of whether it's a calcareous sand.
That makes sense. Okay.
You know about calcareous sands probably more than I do.
Yeah, they're a
But
pain in the butt. That's no question about
the
that.
calcareous sands tend to have higher pH because
How do calcareous sands measure out from a physical standpoint? Are they as strong as silicas? I can't imagine they're as strong, are they?
For our usage, they're fine.
So from a physical, just strictly talking physics. Now, if I talk chemistry, it's a nightmare. But from a physical standpoint, they're as strong as a silica sand.
Really have, like I said, bulk of our sands are river sands, and bulk of the river sands are calcareous sands.
Yeah.
So
wasn't that? I mean, pretty much west of the Mississippi is calcareous.
Yeah,
or west of Pittsburgh, really.
Or at least a good part of the putting greens in the U.S. are built out of
calcareous. Yeah. But I never knew that. I never even thought to ask that question. But and I always would have assumed, and I shouldn't assume because what happens then is that a calcareous sand physically would be softer or less structurally sound.
No, we're not really working with sandstone or things that really soft.
Right.
So they tend to be stability wise for the amount of traffic that we get with humans or maintenance vehicles, they're fine.
Yeah.
They're going to have, in general, it's going to have adequate stability. They're not breaking down. Again, I tell you, we look at those diagnostic cores of greens that are 20, 40, 50 years old.
Yeah.
And we don't see particles breaking down. Not in our lifetime, anyways.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe years, but not probably mine.
But that's why it's so important to test it up front so you know what you're dealing with.
Of course.
So in the last seconds or minutes that I have with you, unfortunately, I keep wanting to bring back this thought, and I'm going to let you answer this. There's a lot of good reasons why anybody in the golf course or sports turf field should go to you. I mean, what's your sales pitch on that? And I don't mean that to sound derogatory, but when you're talking to a client group, I mean, when should I use you? If I'm a golf course superintendent, when is the best time for me to call Sam and say, hey, I need your help? Well,
or even just, I always often tell people we're kind of cheap insurance a lot of times.
Yeah, that's all
this is. You're getting a new lot of top dress sand in. Let's make sure it's the same as the previous lot of top sand. Just because it's still brown in color doesn't mean it's the same. You can do a particle size test, make sure you've got something that isn't going to hurt you.
So every load of top dressing I bring in, I should send?
Certainly not every load, but if you're getting one load a year, yeah.
That makes sense.
If you're getting a lot of material in over a construction project, we say every 1,000 tons.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, construction it's a necessity to have you involved.
So if you're looking to, I need a new some more bunker sand. I want to top off all my bunkers with an extra 2 inches. Make sure that bunker sand, get it tested. Make sure. As I said, sands change based on, or maybe this was a conversation you and I had before this, but sands do change fairly routinely site to site, time to time. And that's not a bad thing. It's just sand's a
It
natural.
is what it is. I mean, it's Mother Nature, really, if you
It's
think
a
about it.
natural material. So I think in a lot of respects, from just a routine maintenance, it's a good idea when you're buying your annual supplies to have them tested.
Now, I might be a cynic, but and you can certainly correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you're going to agree with me here. I work with a lot of guys that are starting a construction project, and they get a sample of sand in, and they get their what I refer to, and I'm going to be derogatory here, and I mean no disrespect. It's the Hollywood sample from the sand guy, and I always say test every load because send it to Sam and just take a look and make sure that what they sent you on this original page is actually, don't count on anybody other than the lab to tell you what you're dealing with. I mean, am I getting overly cynical or paranoid, or is that a fair statement?
I don't think you're the only one that thinks that way, but I won't say that. But I certainly don't think you're the only one that thinks that way. We have quality control programs that we recommend during construction that we'd be happy to send to anyone. They're based on one, like I think I told you ahead of time, I've been doing this for 25 years. I have predecessors that did it longer than I have. But they're also based on USGA guidelines for quality control programs during construction. So it's not just some willy-nilly thing. It's what's their industry standards, actually. If you're not doing a quality control program, you're not doing it the same way that most people are.
And in the grand scheme of things, this is not an expensive process. It's not an expensive insurance program. And I love that word because I think that's really ultimately what it is. But God forbid if something's really whacked, you're going to call them up and say, dude, this isn't right. And save them from a potentially $1 million loss of sorts.
I think an important thing that I want to bring up is when we're doing the quality control testing, we typically, if samples get to us in the morning, we have the results by the end of the day.
Wow, that's great.
Unless there's something odd about the sample, it doesn't always that way, but that is typically what happens. Samples come in the evening, they're available the next day. Yeah. So it's really not a hold up, to the project, and it's just good due diligence to make sure you're getting what you're supposed to get.
Wow. Well, Sam, I can't thank you enough. And like I said, I think I'm going to have to get you back, or maybe what I'll do is I'll get Kevin Hicks on here with you because he knows a lot more about the golf course world than I probably do. But this is really important. And like I said, it's one of the things that we just don't have a great handle on. I mean, earthworks folks, I mean, we're good at chemistry and biology, but man, what you guys do is so important. And, I would think that everybody would want to really get that testing done. And, one of the things that we kind of broached over, but, testing your top dressing every time you bring it in. And especially if you're new at a golf course, get that core observation so you have at least an idea as to what you're dealing with. Can you imagine working on a really crappy core and you come take this new job and you wonder why I can't grow grass here, and you think there's something wrong with you. And the reality is it's manageable-ish, fixable-ish, depending on how bad it is, and that's the ish. But for a handful of dollars here and there, I mean, having that data in their hand is truly a valuable thing. I mean, you can't, it's like driving blind at times,
Well, like I said, I just the opposite of you. I know soil physics. I don't know soil chemistry and biology other than
nobody does. We make it all up as we go.
But I, as I said to you before, our area is certainly kind of a niche area. It's not something that people think about all the time, but it's critical, and it can make the difference between success and difficulties.
Well, that's why I wanted you on, because I wanted people to think about this, because it is so bloody important. And every step of the way, test your top dressing, compare it to what you've currently got, test your sand before you test your top. I mean, there's so many things that can be evaluated. Even this water release curve report is just makes a huge difference. But if you're doing construction, those got to be the guys that are calling you on the most regular basis. I would hope so.
We do renovations and construction are a very big part of our business.
I would hope so, because I can't imagine doing a construction project without a lot of good physics. And that's how we got you on here.
Part of material selection.
Yeah, exactly.
Materials that are going to work.
Sam, how do they find you? What's the website?
We're at www, of course, turfdiag.com. That's TURFDIAG. www.turfdiag.com, short for Turf Diagnostics. So www.turfdiag.com, or they can call me or my partner Dwayne at 855-769-4231. That's 855-769-4231, Turf and Soil Diagnostics.
And I would encourage anybody that's growing anything to get some physical testing done and give them a call. And you're at all the trade shows. I run into you at almost every show. So we're recording this the week prior to going to Orlando, and I'm not sure when we'll air this, but I'll see you in Orlando.
Yes, sir. Most definitely.
And I guess I ran into you 2 weeks ago at STMA out in Salt Lake. Right. So it's good that you're getting out there. But again, I can't thank you enough. We will continue to feed the lab because I can't, I mean, I can't do what I do well without what you do. I mean, that, again, it goes back to the three-legged stool. And if one of the legs is busted, the whole system is busted, and your leg is as important as any leg going there. And it's hard to, you really need to spend that time to get all that kind of data done. So I
appreciate the opportunity to be on here with you, Joe.
Absolutely, Sam. Appreciate it. And if you're not working with Sam, give him a call. And this is the Earthworks podcast. We will be back next week. If you're not a subscriber, please subscribe. We will we'll be at all the shows this year, and obviously available to talk physics via Sam. So there you go. Thank you very much for watching today.